President Biden's big speech on the wars in Israel and Ukraine missing the mark. The president getting slammed for a mostly meandering address full of generalities and trying to link the two conflicts together.
So let me share with you why making sure Israel and Ukraine succeed is vital for America's national security. You know, history has taught us that when terrorists don't pay a price for their terror, when dictators don't pay a price for their aggression, they cause more chaos and death and more destruction. Iran is supporting Russia in Ukraine, and it's supporting Hamas and other terrorist groups in the region, and will continue to hold them accountable, I might add. We cannot and will not let terrorists like Hamas and tyrants like Putin win. I refuse to let that happen.
Biden's speech not doing much to cool down the Muslim world. Minutes before the president's primetime address, rockets hit a base in Iraq where American troops were. And a new Axios report says this, quote, "Never before have we talked to so many top government officials who, in private, are so worried about so many overseas conflicts at once." Biden, however, earning high praise from his former chief of staff.
Thank God Joe Biden's our president, not Donald Trump. I thought that what you saw tonight was a savvy and experienced president navigating some very difficult territory, doing so in a way that was persuasive and effective.
Okay. Judge Janine, do you think Biden...
You don't want to come to me first.
Do you think he was effective in communicating why the American people should get behind him in this project?
No. First of all, I wanted to hear more about the hostages. I wanted to hear more about the fact that Americans were killed in Israel. I didn't want to hear about Ukraine. I especially didn't want to hear about Ukraine, given the fact that we gave them $200 million a week ago. And of the $100 billion he's promoting, $60 billion for Ukraine, $14 billion for Israel. I mean, you know, it was like he did exactly what I didn't want him to do. Yesterday, I said, I don't want him leveraging Israel to give more money to Ukraine. That's exactly what he did. And I said I wanted America respected at the end of that speech. I wanted the world to understand they were going to deal with America. The guy is just, I mean, viscerally, you look at him and you're not afraid of him. I mean, he is an example of how we don't have any power. But let me tell you something. When he tells Israel to restrain herself and not be blinded by rage after what they did to the innocent Jews and Israelis, how could he possibly say that? And he says he's going to punish Iran's going to pay a price. You want to talk about money? How about you cut off the funding? And Ron Klain, how you could even think that we're better off with Joe Biden, you've lost it, okay? Donald Trump gave us the Abraham Accords. Donald Trump sanctioned. He enforced the sanctions against Iran. Donald Trump pulled us out of the Iran nuclear deal when Obama was sending love letters to them to say, oh, we can work on this thing together. And there were no beheadings when Trump was president, and the caliphate was destroyed when he was president. So we're in the middle of two wars right now, on the verge of a third. We've got 1.5 million gotaways, and we got all kinds of foreign nationals, and we got a clueless guy up there jumping around talking about Indo-Pacific and comparing, I got one more thing, Ukraine to Israel. Here's the difference. Russia wants Ukraine. The Arab world and the Hamas wants to, not just the Israel, the land, they want to kill every Jew in sight. That's the difference. He ought to understand that.
Greg, I forgot about the Obama love letters. Do you think the love letters might have fueled this attack on Israel?
Were these love letters to men?
To the mullahs.
No,
oh, sorry.
Definitely not.
Remember that? There is something off-putting about using a horrible event as part of a package deal, right? I mean, imagine after 9/11, you know, saying we also need to fund a conflict in Iraq. Wait. But the attack on October 7th should stand alone. And I think it was like he took something new and ugly and married it to something that's been around, like an arranged marriage between a scared teen and an old rich dude. So if you're against aid to Ukraine, well, then you must be anti-Israel. I think this is why we can't have nice things. I don't know. This was the opposite of clarity. It should have been about the here and now. It should have been about October 7th, not a dragged out war, which somehow our interest mysteriously vanished from our mental shelf space over a year ago. I mean, the Ukraine war is such an interesting war because how much do we hear about it anyway? We only hear about it when one thing happens and then another thing. It's like not even a consistent, like, where did it go?
Well, we only hear about it when they ask for more money for it.
Yeah.
Jessica, do you think that Ron Klain was accurate when he said that this was a savvy presidential address?
Well, I'd like to quote the illustrious Brit Hume.
We're here, member voter. Thank you, Jessica.
This will be, you're very welcome. This will be remembered as one of the best, if not the best, speeches of his presidency. He was firm, he was unequivocal, and he was strong. Now, how you felt about it definitely depends on where you stand right now in terms of Ukraine funding. And this is something that is splitting Republicans in Congress who think that this can't be a blank check forever. But there is something to be said for what President Biden was doing in defining his strategy writ large versus just talking about Israel on its own. He didn't use the term axis of evil, but he essentially did define a new axis of evil, right? Russia, Iran, Hamas, and China. And we need to make sure that their targets, Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan, something that we talk about all the time, that he's got to be tougher on China, are not incurred upon, taken over, more massacres, etc. The love letter front. Kim Jong-un, I believe, got the sweetest of love letters from Donald Trump. And Otto Warmbier, who died on Donald Trump's watch, right? He came home and he was in a vegetative state, and his parents, seeking mercy for their son, took him off life support. So please don't give me this, that everything is all hunky-dory while Donald Trump...
Donald Trump brought him home.
Brought him home
it was during
dead.
Obama.
Okay. Anywho, I think that it is really important that he, and I know it was a major kind of sticking point, and we're going to talk about it in the next block as well, that President Biden not only called out anti-Semitism, but talked about Islamophobia. And Greg says we need to live in the present. And I agree with you. And I've said it multiple times today. You got to start every conversation with, this is what Hamas did to Israel. But after 9/11, not only did we make tremendous military mistakes, we made tremendous mistakes at home. We put cops in mosques and surveilled these people. We did racial profiling up the wazoo and treated the moderate Muslim population in this country as if they were all about to be arrested for a crime that they did not commit. And I don't want a repeat of that. And there is a 6-year-old dead Palestinian-American boy who was murdered because of Islamophobia in this country. And that he's the president for all Americans, and that includes the Muslim population.
Jessica, the comparison, though, between right crazy and left crazy is a bit weird. Your crazy is based in structures of academia, medical establishments now, entertainment, media. This one-off nutbag who should get the death penalty for killing that Muslim child is a crazy person. But he's not on the Columbian faculty. He's not a politician, part of the squad. He's just a crazed nutbag who should be killed.
I agree. And also, with respect to the two-siding thing that we're now seeing, I don't see thousands of people in the streets chanting, kill all of the Muslims. I do see them chanting, kill all of the Jews and death to America. I want to say one thing that caught my attention during Biden's speech, which was so ridiculous and infuriating at a time that we're in, when he brought up the two-state solution.
Yeah.
The delusional ivory tower idea about the two-state solution with who? With Hamas in Gaza? With the Palestinian Authority, who released a call to the imams in the West Bank today to talk about killing Jews in their sermons? Or should it be Islamic Jihad, who is trying to fight a civil war with the Palestinian Authority because they're too moderate. Their Jew hatred and anti-Israel hatred is too moderate. It's an academic idea that has been floated for far too long. It should be dead in the water because Israel clearly cannot be neighbors with any of these people who are in the streets celebrating what happened on October 7th, and they celebrated after 9/11 as well. Let's not forget that. So this idea that he just threw in this two-sides issue of a two-state solution at a time when Israel hasn't even invaded Gaza to avenge what has been done was just a distraction, and it's not helpful in fighting the evil that continues, not just in the Middle East, but that we're seeing pop up on college campuses all over the country.
Thank you, Katie.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.